Texas politics have been in the spotlight with several new controversial laws passed by the Republican-led state legislature. Among them are top conservative priorities, including new voting laws, a cardiac activity abortion ban, and permitless gun carry regulations. But data show some areas of red state Texas are moving left, especially in the fastest-growing suburbs. As the state's demographics change, some question if these new laws actually represent what the majority of Texans believe. Joining us now to break all this down is Jim Henson. He's the executive director of the Texas Politics Project. Jim, the demographics of your state are changing. Are Texas Republicans worried about alienating voters with some of the new laws that they've set in place?
Well, I think they're not worried about alienating voters with the laws. They're worried about the demographic changes, but they're gambling on mobilizing their base with the passage of laws with an agenda and a direction and policy that is aimed squarely at Republican voters. And that's why we've been seeing the kind of legislation coming out of Texas we've seen in recent months on everything from abortion to guns to election laws.
Let's dig deeper into some of those specific changes, starting with the state's new abortion law. It sparked an uproar across the country, particularly in blue states, as you can imagine. What has been the reaction in Texas? Has there been a backlash there as well?
Well, I think the backlash is beginning to develop. I mean, part of the issue here is that in many ways the fetal activity bill you referred to that passed here was billed as a ban on abortion after 6 weeks, but the other provisions that have come to light in terms of civil litigation and opportunities for the so-called bounty hunting, I think is causing a lot of people to give that law a second look. When we polled on that in the University of Texas Tribune poll in June, there was a slight majority against the bill. It was 44 in favor, 46 opposed. When you break that down, it had universal opposition among Democrats and majority, but not overwhelming majority support among Republicans. But if you ask people if they're in favor of abolishing abortion rights completely, you get very different kinds of results. And that's really ultimately what that 6-week ban is aiming to do.
Uber and Lyft say that they will pay legal fees for drivers sued under the law. You made reference to the so-called bounty hunter aspect of it. And to explain for our viewers who maybe haven't been following this as closely as we have, that's a $10,000 fine put on anybody who's found to be helping somebody with an abortion in the state of Texas after 6 weeks. So Planned Parenthood got a restraining order against an anti-abortion group. Do you expect to see more response in the private sector like Uber and Lyft?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that's going to be the mobilizations and the opposition strategy that groups are going to take in the country to try to put economic pressure on the state. Part of incumbent Republicans' campaign position has always been that they are good stewards of the state economy, and that's often used to balance out the more conservative social policy that rubs some people the wrong way. And so I think this economic pressure is only going to mount. We've seen it in other areas of policy in Texas, particularly LGBTQ rights, and I think we're going to see that ramp up significantly in coming weeks.
Let's shift away from abortion for a little bit to talk about voting. Texas is banning 24-hour voting and putting new restrictions on absentee voting. How many voters will these changes actually affect, and what are the demographics of those voters?
Well, as you say, these are really the big omnibus voting bill that was just passed by the legislature and is expected to be signed by the governor soon will disproportionately affect urban voters, and in Texas, as in most places in the country, that means people of color. The thrust of these bills is really twofold. I mean, they're the kind of institutional tightening of laws that you're talking about with things like requiring more signatures and raising the barriers to voting. But it also empowered poll watchers and raised punishments for people that are poll workers in a way that really creates a much more tense and environment. And we at polling places, and we expect that to manifest itself most strongly in urban areas. And it's hard not to see that as the intent of the law, given the way that it was written.
Texas also loosened open carry gun laws. How do voters feel about that?
Well, in terms of open carry, or what the legislature did was basically loosen the laws so that criminal record and you're over 21, you don't have to have any licensing or training to carry a handgun. And you can, as you say, carry that concealed or open. That law had narrow majority support. Had narrow majority support among Republicans. Among Texans overall, it was deeply opposed. It was 36 in favor, 57% opposed. But again, the target of that legislation was not Texans overall, or what we would think of looking ahead as a general election group, the general electorate. That was aimed at the highly organized and conservative groups within the Republican Party, for whom this was a real gift.
Jim, this brings up, I think, the point that I'm most interested in getting to with you. Overall, the Texas Politics Project is nonpartisan, but it's interesting to see as these pieces of legislation that are so highly politicized are being pushed through the legislature there. Whether that ultimately is going to help or hurt Republicans, do you have any information on that?
Well, that's obviously pretty speculative, but I can tell you this, that a lot of these measures, as I've said, are aimed to land with Republican voters in a way that really stimulates the far right of the party without alienating the broader group of Republicans, who are still a fairly conservative group of voters, but for whom some of these things do seem to be pushing too far. There's a lot of speculation in Texas that this could bear on the general elections if Republicans can't pivot away from some of these things when they go into general election season. I think it's an issue overall as we looked at the mood of Texas voters. The right track. If we looked at our right track, wrong track number, more than 50% thought the state was on a wrong track. That was a lot of movement among Democrats and in particular among independents. The problem in Texas is that the Democratic Party doesn't have a lot of capacity to mount this fight. And so as you raise issues like boycotts and other interest group activities, that is going to fuel the opposition to these kinds of policies. But there's a big problem with the fact that we are in, September of the year before a gubernatorial election, and the Democrats, have still not chosen a gubernatorial candidate and don't even have anybody, significant declared. So there's a real problem in looking at what the vehicle for a kind of accountability is here.
So important to be able to separate actual perceptions among Texas voters from caricatures that are otherwise made, I think, elsewhere across the country.
Absolutely.
Jim Henson, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.